is up, guys? Welcome back to the Keep It Hoop YouTube channel. Today we are going to do another laid back video, have some fun with it. It is going to be another tier list maker. Came across this on Twitter, I think earlier in the week, and figured why not. These tier list makers are pretty fun, and I know we've done multiple, or at least this will be the second Knicks one we've done. The one we did, I think, on Wednesday. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. But is of just this year's roster. But I thought this would be a fun one, looking back at the Knicks of the past. The Knicks are finally good, and a lot of talk has been on Julius Randle, RJ Barrett, Derrick Rose, and this group of guys. But it's also fun to look back now that we are good at some of the sadder, more or I guess less fortunate times, and just a throwback, looking at some of the players we used to have. Before we get started, though, if you could like, subscribe, share, and comment, would mean a lot. Also follow us on our social media pages, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Links will be in the description below. So right off the bat, you have Knicks legend at the top, and I think there's only one guy you can put here, right? And it has to be Carmelo Anthony. Now, Julius Randle can even make you can make a case for Julius Randle being here just because of how I think legendary this one season is. Like, this is one of those seasons where Knicks fans, regardless of what happens in the playoffs, regardless of what happens in the next few years, this is going to be the season where, along with I think the 2012, 2013 season, that people look back at and really kind of reminisce, and it's going to resonate with them. And even if we end up doing better in the future, I think people are going to remember this for how magical this season felt because of how it came out of nowhere and how unexpected it was. That being said, I think Carmelo has to be on a different level. That word legend is pretty heavy. So I would put Julius Randle at the tier below, at great first time in New York, at the top of that tier. But Carmelo, going back to him for a second, is just what he did on the Knicks. I know his time on the Knicks didn't end well, and it wasn't just the fact that him and the front office didn't really see eye to eye, but the performance on the court, you could tell it was the beginning, the end for him. That being said, hit the big games he had, being the winning the scoring title, the 60 something point game against Charlotte. He always played well against the big teams, the big names. You know, um, Multiple All Star appearances. He gave the New York Knicks, that face of the franchise. And granted, we had Amari, and he was kind of the first guy to come and believe in the Knicks and wanting to play in New York again. But he didn't really work out because of the injuries. And Carmelo gave New York Knicks fans and the front office and the players someone they could kind of go to and trust, the face of the franchise, and gave us some hope, right? And a lot of those years were wasted with some bad draft picks, bad trades, bad free agent signings. And some of that is on him as well. But I think that overall, you look at the body of work and everything he did for the New York Knicks. Out of everyone who's played in the last 5, even 10 years, he has to be that one guy that we all look at and say, Knicks legend, right? Julius Randle, though, going back to him, great for his time in New York. Look, there's everybody's been very vocal about how bad he was last year, right? Or not even just bad, but how annoying it was to root for him, to watch him. The turnovers, the inefficient shooting at times, the lack of trust, the spin moves, or obviously that was a big one. But the way he's come in this season, more in shape, bought in on both ends of the ball, um, you know, an improved defender, more trusting and improved playmaker, the jump shooting, which I think part of it is because of the lack of fans and just a weird season it is this year, but still an improved shooter. I mean, he's in, I think, right outside the top tier of MVP and most improved candidates. He's in that second tier. I don't think he'll win either award, but man, just the what he does for this team, and what he does for this winning team, I think is the important part. And I think you're going to see a lot of guys, at least on my tier list, a lot of guys who are on this year's team are going to be great first time in New York just because of the fact that they are winning. And that's not something you can say, unfortunately, for a lot of these guys who have been playing for the Knicks or did play for the Knicks in the past 5 years. But yeah, Julius Randle, great first time in New York, All Star. Um, I think that if he can continue this level of play, even if it drops off a little bit, this kind of importance, effectiveness, and efficiency for the Knicks, then he can creep up into that Knicks legend tier as well. So other than that, I think we'll go down the list in order, at least for the most part. Aaron Aflalo, I'd say solid, didn't help or hurt. I would say a little above average, but I wouldn't definitely, I wouldn't go as far to say ultimately didn't do well for New York. He missed some time with calf injuries and I think a few other injuries here and there, but he was solid, like it says there. Could shoot the ball, could defend, and gave them some solid games, some solid minutes. But I wouldn't say great first time in New York. There's gonna be guys who I don't fully recognize. Only a couple. I think this is Kadeem Allen. I would say ultimately didn't do well for New York just because he didn't play much. Never really cracked the rotation at a consistent level. He defended really hard, and that was kind of why the Knicks really fell in love with him. But his offense never really came along. I feel like his first game as a Knick was actually really good, but he again just never got consistent minutes. Lou Odmanson ultimately didn't do well for New York. Um, yeah, I think by the time he got to the Knicks, it was towards the end of his career, and he just didn't provide a lot for us. He was never a great offensive player. Hustled on defense, but yeah, just didn't do much for the Knicks. Ron Baker ultimately didn't do well for New York. I think Ron Baker did solid for his standards. I think he's a guy that isn't the most talented or the most athletic. He just goes out there, tries, decent enough shooter, but while he tries on defense, can't really stop guys either. Tried hard, ended up being on some memes, some jokes, and stuff like that. I think his most famous Knicks moment was actually getting dunked on by Anthony Davis, right? Pretty bad poster, but wouldn't go as far to say wish he never came to the Mecca, but didn't really do much. RJ Barrett, great first time in New York. Now, I think there are some people who would actually put him as solid or even ultimately didn't do well for New York, at least earlier on this season or at times last season. But the way he's played this season, especially over the last 2-3 months, I don't think you can debate that he's on his way to becoming a very, very good player. He continues to get better, adding new things to his game. The pull up mid range is really good. He's going to his right more. He has added the 3-point shot, which looks a lot better this year after starting off the year horrendously. The catch and shoot, especially, but he's starting to shoot a bit more. I know he hasn't made a lot or even taken a lot of pull up threes. He had one against, I think, who was it against? Vucevic the other day where he got a mismatch, pulled it back out, one dribble pull up three. That was really nice to see. And his defense, I think people haven't even talked about that much, but that's also very improved. So I'm very happy for him. Great first time in New York. Michael Beasley, I would say solid. Didn't help or hurt. But his time in New York was actually pretty good. It exceeded my expectations. You know, the numbers aren't going to be eye popping, but you watch those games, and he did have some games where he kind of just went off. And fun to watch, annoying to watch at times as well. But I would say solid. Iggy Brazdeikis ultimately didn't do well for New York. Didn't get a lot of playing time. It was funny, I think, in some of the behind the scenes video. It was nice to see him and RJ Barrett because they were friends growing up. Played on the same, I think, AAU teams. So it was nice to see them together. But yeah, ultimately didn't crack the rotation and didn't get solid minutes. Nerlens, no, actually not Nerlens. Nerlens is somewhere down the line. But Reggie Bullock, great first time in New York. Again, I think he's one of those guys that benefits from us being so successful this year. Um, I didn't think he would end up starting for the season, but he's come in, he's defended. Not the best defender, but I mean, that's the thing with a lot of the guys on our team this year. They're not elite defenders individually, but they go out there, they try hard. He seems to be in the right place at the right time. He's very capable shooter, one of the better ones the Knicks have, which is very important because they don't have a lot of great shooters. And he seems to just make big plays. So yeah, I would have him great for his time in New York. Trey Burke, I would actually say great first time in New York. And New York was also great for him. He was a pretty highly draft pick coming out of college, had the big run in the NCAA tournament with Michigan, with Tim Hardaway, I think, actually. And he never really panned out in Utah. He talked about some of the problems he had in Utah. He didn't focus as much on basketball as he should have. Came to New York kind of as an afterthought, and it's not like he played a huge amount of minutes immediately, but Started to have really big games, that pad mid-range shot, and he's had a solid career since. So I think he was actually one of those guys. Again, going back, looking at what we expected, exceeded those expectations immensely. And yeah, I would say he was great for his time. Jose Calderon, solid. Didn't help or hurt. Jose Calderon in Toronto was one of those guys who I watched and I was like, I don't know how he gets it done, but he used to have assist to turnover ratios of 8 or 9, very efficient, very smart basketball player, could shoot the ball. Came to New York, had solid moments, but he was never, crazy. Um, yeah, I would say solid, nothing more, nothing less. Damian Dotson, he'd probably be on the lower end of solid, didn't help or hurt. There were times where I thought he should have gotten more minutes, and then there were times where he just kind of disappeared from games. But overall, tried really hard on defense. Solid shooter, a bit streaky at times, but very happy with what he was able to accomplish with the Knicks. Clanthony early ultimately didn't do well for New York, but it's not his fault necessarily. He was someone who coming out of college was, I thought, a really nice pickup. He had a really good game in few good games in the NCAA tournament. I think it was against Kentucky. Um, and he ultimately didn't pan out. He was involved in a shooting accident where I think he got shot in the knee and he just never really recovered from there. So unfortunate for him that injuries played a part of it. Um, this Ellison, Henry Ellison, ultimately didn't do well for New York. I know he had one game where he was close to a triple double, maybe even did get a triple double, but didn't do much for the Knicks. Wayne Ellington, I'll say solid. Um, yeah, kind of like Aaron Aflalo. He shot on defense, a good shooter, but didn't do much outside of that. Didn't really stand out. Derek Fisher, wish he never came to the mecca of basketball. So we finally have our first guy to make that tier. And it's kind of unfortunate because I was a Derek Fisher fan before his time as a coach in New York. I was a Kobe fan growing up. I watched a lot of those Lakers teams, and Derek Fisher was a big part of those teams. Helped Kobe and the Lakers win championships with some really clutch shooting. Um, played solid defense and was always one of those floor generals. You can tell he had a certain level of leadership and respect from the players. Just went out there and fought every day. So I actually thought that he would be solid as a coach because of that. Now I didn't think his first job would just be all right, head coach of the New York Knicks. I think that looking back, had he had more time to develop as a coach through whether it was the G League or becoming an assistant coach or just being around the game in different aspects, maybe as a front office guy, I actually think that he still would have had the right tools to be a good coach. But he was, again, kind of shoved into becoming the Knicks coach, forced to run the triangle. He also has some off court troubles. He had the whole incident with Matt Barnes and his kid and his wife, which I won't go into here. He also had some rumors going on with Tim Hardaway and stuff. So, didn't think he handled any of the off court troubles well. And that never goes well for a coach, especially if you are playing in a big market or coaching in a big market like New York. Overall, for his sake, for my memory and fandom of those Lakers teams in the past, or Kobe and guys like Derek Fisher, but also for the Knicks. So I wish he never came. I wish he never coached here. David Fizdale, ultimately didn't do well for New York, and it was disappointing because I was a Fizdale fan before he got to New York. I loved what he did in Memphis. People had some gripes with the way he handled situations with, I think, Marc Gasol he didn't fully get along with, but I thought that the way he battled for his players, he spoke up for them. He was a guy that preached defense and team basketball, and I thought that for the group of guys we had back then, the roster we had, he was perfect. Really excited when the Knicks signed him, but it just didn't work out. And yeah, for whatever reason, it's weird because I think his philosophies and what he prioritizes on a basketball team. Now, I don't know about the way he goes about and does it per se, but some of the priorities and philosophies kind of match with Thibodeau, who we have now and is obviously great. So it's actually weird how drastic the differences are. Now, granted, Fizdale didn't have this roster, but the roster isn't too different, right? I mean, he still had Julius and RJ and stuff like that. And granted, both of those guys are better this year. Some of that also has to go to Thibodeau, right? So, um, ultimately unfortunate, but didn't do well for New York. Langston Galloway, I would say on the upper end of solid. It didn't help or hurt. You could even make an argument for a great first time in New York, along with a guy like Trey Burke. Maybe I'll end up, redoing the list once we have kind of guys slotted into place. But I'll put him there for now. Langston Galloway, a guy who came out of nowhere, really, and especially his first year in New York. Has some huge putback dunks, has some big games. Now as a fan, he was a really quiet guy who kind of just went about his business. Not a lot of hype, didn't talk much, but yeah, I was a big fan of him. Um, I actually don't know who this is, but I'm gonna say he ultimately didn't do well for New York because I can't recognize you. Jerry Grant also ultimately didn't do great for his time in New York. Yeah, I mean, I don't. Not much to say. We did need a point guard. I think when we drafted him, he was a guy who couldn't really shoot, but had solid size and wingspan. So I think we were hopeful about his defense, but it just never came to fruition. Never really put it together. So yeah, Tim Hardaway. See at the top of solid didn't help or hurt. I wouldn't say great because his expectations were actually kind of high and he didn't exceed them. He definitely has some good moments with the Knicks. I remember the rookie sophomore game and his back and forth with it was Dion Waiters. That was fun to watch. He was definitely one of those guys that came in and had an aura, a following, a fandom, and he brought this kind of confidence, swag, and attitude that not a lot of rookies or players on the Knicks at that time had. So it was kind of fun to watch. It was easy to root for him, but um, was horrendous defensively in his time as a Knick, and his shooting was still erratic and inconsistent. So, yeah, I would say solid. Mo Harkless, very short stint as a Knick. This solid didn't hurt. Looking back, he's a piece that if we ended up keeping would have been good for this team, given his shooting and defense. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy with the guys we brought in. But yeah, I mean, Mo Harkless, didn't play that many games. I wouldn't say that he didn't do well, but by no means was he great. Billy Hernan Gomez. I would say towards middle to end of solid didn't help or hurt. He had some solid minutes for the Knicks. Um, there were times where he looked like a walking double double. It was a great rebounder and a solid inside presence, scoring the ball, whether it was off of post ups, pick and pops, or just getting rebounds and kind of putbacks. But his defense was shaky. He was kind of inconsistent. Some of that because of the minutes he got. And but those go hand in hand, right? He didn't put up great numbers all the time because he didn't get minutes. He didn't get minutes though because he didn't play great defense. Yeah, he was solid. Mario Hazonia, solid didn't help or hurt. Now he has some big moments against some of the biggest players in the game. He had the block against LeBron and then the dunk and step over Giannis. Those were really fun moments to watch as a Knicks fan. And look, if your team isn't doing good, you need moments like that to kind of keep the I don't know the morale up, right? So he was fun to have on the team, but didn't do much. Besides that, Isaiah Hicks ultimately didn't do well for New York. Was a guy that I don't think we expected to do much, but didn't get consistent minutes. Never cracked the rotation. Justin Holiday, solid first time in New York. Another guy that, along with the likes of Aaron Aflalo, um, Langston Galloway, Wayne Ellington, even a guy who just played solid defense, tried hard. Um, but that's about it. Never really stood out. Um, Hornacek. Where do I want to put Hornacek? Keep him here. I don't think he's as bad as the last tier, but I will say that he just never really panned out. He again was another victim of having to run the triangle at times, which he made it. I don't know how clear he made it, but it was obvious he didn't want to do that. And he's another guy who I was very happy about the signing coming into the season. When it happened, I thought that his time in Phoenix, he showcased a decent um, coaching skills, but it just never came together. Jarrett Jack, solid. It's about it. Didn't do anything crazy. Wasn't bad, but yeah, wasn't great. Never really stood out. Forgot his name. Jenkins, good shooter. Never really got playing minutes. Ultimately didn't do well for New York. Brandon Jennings. I would actually have him towards the top of solid. Didn't help or hurt. He was coming off of a Achilles injury, I want to say, that he suffered in Detroit. And the thing is, before that Achilles injury, he was averaging about 20 and 7. He was having a really good season in Detroit before they got Reggie Jackson. He was really having a kind of resurgent year. He struggled towards his later years in Milwaukee, went to Detroit, was having a breakout year, and then he got hurt, and then he's never been the same player since, unfortunately. And obviously, that's a big injury. But he came to New York, and he was still a little bit erratic on offense. I think a bit more controlled than he had been in the past. But his defense, the analytics, and you know, wasn't great on him defensively. But you could tell he tried hard, especially to begin the season. I remember he had games where he was full court pressing and he was just putting a lot of pressure on the other team. So compared to expectations and just kind of seeing everything he had come through and kind of the energy boost he gave our team at times, not all the ways, but at times, I'd put him as solid. Jimmer Fredette ultimately didn't do well for New York. Just never really cracked the rotation, the lineup, and just never really did much for the team. DeAndre Jordan, solid. I think he was key in the limited time he was there in giving guys like Mitchell Robinson advice. Just being around those young guys, I think it was solid. But in terms of, on-court production, not too much. And that's Cantor. Ness Cantor might actually be on the end of great for his time in New York. His defense will always be something people talk about, whether it's teams he's been on or teams he's currently on. And I do think he's been a bit better in Portland on defense this year. Terry Stotts has talked about it, that he gets kind of this bad reputation for being a bad defender, that he's improved. So I'll take his word for that. But yeah, Cantor's time in New York, his ability to just score at such an efficient level. I mean, his offensive talent is just through the roof. An insane rebound, one of the best rebounders we have in the league. Yeah, great first time in New York. I loved also his kind of personality, his ability to just always stand up for his team. Very team first guy. And and he seemed to be a fun guy off the court as well. So great first time in New York. Kevin Knox, one of the poster childs for ultimately didn't do well for New York. A little bit unfortunate because he hasn't had a consistent role over the last couple of years. And after having a really solid rookie season, I thought he was actually on his way to becoming a solid role player, but he just never got consistent minutes under Fizdale, and it's just fizzled out. No pun intended, but just hasn't really panned out after that. Luke Cornett, solid, didn't help, and I think this is another guy that benefited from his time in New York as well. He, I believe, came out of the G League and stretched five, has some solid games. Nothing more, nothing less. Is this my guy Kuzminskis? I would say ultimately didn't do well because he never really put it all together. He was solid defensively, solid athlete, solid shooter, but never excelled at anything and never really put it all together. But throwback, he's one of those guys where I see memes or pictures or videos of guys from, the past, and I always forget, but then I see those things and I remember, and I'm like, wow, we did have Kuzminskis, and we played Kuzminskis a decent amount. Courtney Lee, solid, didn't help, but towards the top, again, he's with the guys in this kind of tier of Aaron Aflalo, Langston Galloway, Drew Holiday, Wayne Ellington. We've gotten a lot of these 3-and-D guys, solid players who, go out, try hard, try to spread the floor. We had a lot of these guys in part due to, our attempt to complement Melo's play style. We put these guys on the other team's best perimeter offensive players, get them to just spot up in the corner three and be ready. And I would say all of them were solid. I think Courtney Lee, you could even make an argument for great first time in New York, but I think that's too much. If there was a tier between that, like good first time in New York, I would put him there because I think Solid is a bit of an understatement, at least compared to some of the guys that are on this tier, right? Like his time was better than Mo Harkless or Mario Hizonia or Damian Dotson, or but like he's not on the same tier as Julius Randle, RJ Barrett. So it is what it is. Robin Lopez, solid, didn't help or hurt. I was a fan of Robin Lopez before he got there. I'm still a fan. I love his personality, but just his effort, T first mentality, willing to do the dirty work, solid screen setter, really good box out. Um, and he's a guy who, again, a solid rebounder. But if you remember those years in Portland where he played with LaMarcus Aldridge, he was a really good to elite box out guy, right? Really good at boxing out. And that helped Marcus Aldridge get a lot of rebounds. Now, Aldridge is a really good rebounder himself, but it definitely helps when you have a guy who's just willing to get down there, do the dirty work, and you're just able to come up with the ball. Doug McDermott ultimately didn't do well for New York. Didn't do much. Had solid moments, solid games, but it is what it is. Now, Tom Thibodeau, man, great for his time in New York. In what, the 50, 60 games he's coached for us, I've been very pleased, surprisingly pleased, the way he has this team battling and fighting regardless of who they're playing, regardless of what the score is. They could be down 20 in the fourth, they'll fight. They could be going up against the best team in the league, they'll fight. And he's gotten the most and unlocked the full potential, at least so far, of Julius Randle. He's gotten RJ Barrett to take the next step. And I love it. I love watching this team, and then the chemistry they have, and a lot of that thing. Those things come from, obviously you need the players to buy in, but things like this are top down. So it's great having. I won't talk about Dolan because he'll be on the wish he never came to the Mecca basketball tier if he was here. But a lot of that comes from one, Leon Rose, Worldwide West, those guys we brought in the front office. And then they bring in Tibbs, and then Tibbs is a guy that obviously all the players around pretty much every day they have to listen to his voice. They pretty much take on his personality, and I love it. It's been great to see. Emmanuel Mudiay, he's a guy that also kind of revived his career in New York, along with guys like Trey Burke. Um, yeah, I mean, I like this time in New York a lot. I thought he was really solid. Still couldn't shoot, but he attacked the rim a lot. Solid defender, serviceable defender. Wasn't good by any means, but yeah, I would say solid. Um, Not sure who this is, so again, we'll put him on the ultimately didn't do well tier. Joakim Noah. Joakim Noah ultimately didn't do well, man. And it hurts me to put him here because I was a fan of his when he was in Chicago. His unique play style, his intensity, his competitiveness, but for his salary and what everything just we went through, I would say ultimately didn't do well. Frank Ntilikina ultimately didn't do well. Um, Part of it is playing minutes, playing time. He hasn't gotten consistent minutes over the last 2 years or so. Part of it's obviously on him. He's never really developed as an offensive player. I think his offense has gotten better actually, but I've said this in my other videos. I just don't think he's aggressive enough. He's an elite defender, so like he does still have a role on this team, but also any other team that I'm sure will want to take a chance on him going forward. Because if you're obviously you want a guy who can do everything, but if you are able to be elite at one thing, you can carve yourself out a role. Kyle O'Quinn, I think, is solid, somewhere mid. I actually like this time in New York. Another one of those guys who was really fun to watch. He battled, wasn't the most talented. Had a little bit of that mid-range jump shot, but for the most part, just battled. Seemed like a really nice guy, great locker room guy. Um, yeah, solid. Alfred Payton, solid. He's one of the guys that are on this year's team who aren't going to be on the great tier. Everybody has made their gripes with Alfred Payton very well known. I think that he gets too much playing time because while he is a good defender, I don't think the drop off from him to Emmanuel Quickly and Derrick Rose are that big. And I think that he overall, with his lack of shooting and shot selection, really hurts the Knicks on offense more so than he helps the team on defense. And he's usually a negative for the team. This is going to be not Miles, not Mason, one of the Plumlee brothers, Marshall Plumlee. Tried really hard, but again, didn't get a lot of minutes. No offensive game. Ultimately, didn't do well. Bobby Portis, say solid. Um, yeah, not much to say really. Solid, both ends of the floor, solid. Chris Stapps, you know what? I'll give you great. You were obviously, when he was healthy, very good. He was an elite rim protector. Wasn't a great rebounder, but could obviously spread the floor out. That season, he got injured. He was having an MVP type season. Started the year with multiple 30-point games. I mean, it looked like he was on his way to stardom. Ever since, he's just dealt with a lot of injuries and has never really put it together. So unfortunate for him. It was almost, I think, best for both sides when he wanted out because the Knicks kind of were able to take a step back and kind of rework everything top down, and it's worked obviously for the Knicks and the Mavs. They're still doing pretty well. I think him and Luka, if he can stay healthy, is still a very good combo. Kurt Rambis ultimately didn't do well for New York. Chas and Randall, um, ultimately didn't do well for New York. Mitchell Robinson, I think, great first time in New York. Being drafted where he got drafted, I think that people should be surprised, or people were at least surprised at his production coming out of college. He's kind of an unknown raw commodity, and now he's been, just an elite rim protector. His athleticism, finishing around the rim is crazy. As he continues to get stronger, improve on offense, and just to learn more and more about, continuing to not foul, because he's definitely got better at that this year, and becoming a better defender. I'm very excited for his future. It's unfortunate that he's had multiple injuries this year, but he's a tough kid. You saw him play through multiple injuries, play through multiple bruises and hits and here and there. So very happy with him. Big fan of his. Derrick Rose. Now, his first stint, solid. I would say top of solid, didn't help. You could even argue lower end of great first time in New York. But now I think you have to add him here. He's been so big for this team, man. And he's just, especially during that win streak, he was averaging around 15, 16 points, just consistently scoring at, just efficiently at will, getting to his spots. He's been big in the improvements of guys like RJ Barrett, Obi Toppin, Emmanuel Quickly. His veteran leadership is obviously huge for closing out games when you're playing with young guys like he has been, or he has been. So yeah, very happy with his production. Great, great locker room guy you just root for, right? Obviously, he's been through a lot, and I'm happy to see him in New York, winning and with Tibbs. Kevin Serafine ultimately didn't do well. I feel like he just didn't do much. Ramon Sessions, same thing. Dennis Smith, yeah, it's unfortunate. It just never panned out. Part of it, not really. I think with him, he just never really put it together. Like he has spurts. He even had some good games in Detroit when he got there, and then just died down. He just hasn't been able to put it together. It's insane because he has ridiculous athleticism. He should be a solid defender given his athleticism, but he can't shoot. Not that good of a finisher around the rim. So yeah. The other the other intended group was Thanasis. Ultimately didn't do well. Didn't get a lot of playing minutes. Lance Thomas, I would say solid. He's a guy that it's hard to root against. He tried really hard. Solid defender. He's one of those guys that we put on the best best offensive player on the other team a lot. Could knock down the corner three, but wouldn't say great by any means. Alonzo Trier, maybe top end of solid. I was really happy with his production. I was actually surprised we let him go, and I'm surprised he doesn't have a job in the league yet because he's definitely better than multiple guys in the league. Can score very, you know, sporadically off the bench. There are games where he has, single digit points and he doesn't shoot efficiently, but there's also a lot of games where, and I think the majority of the games where he scores well, in double digits, scores at a somewhat efficient clip. Does take a lot of shots and isn't necessarily a playmaker, a great defender, but I'm surprised he doesn't have a job right now. Noah Vonleh, solid towards the top end. I think he actually has some really solid games for the Knicks. Did a little bit of everything. He tried on defense, could score somewhat, and even play make a little bit. Sasha Vucic didn't do well. Derek Williams didn't do well. Troy Williams didn't do well. Kevin Tony Wooden ultimately didn't do well. Now, just looking at the list, maybe I have Trey Burke and Tier on the same. These aren't completely in order, but I think this is pretty much it for me. Now you do have guys who are on this year's team who aren't here. Like I think Emmanuel quickly would be top end of solid, maybe lower end of great for his time in New York. Obi Toppin, I think maybe lower end of solid because I think I've been very vocal about how impressed I am with him and how hopeful I am of Obi Toppin, despite what his numbers might say. But yeah, that's it for I think this list. Again, Knicks legend, I think got Carmelo, Julius Randle with the um, potential to move up at some point. Um, Derek Fisher, obviously, the one guy where it's hard for me to say I wish he never came to the Mecca of basketball because I do have a lot of guys and ultimately didn't do well for New York, but I don't look back and I'm not like, man, I wish they never came to the Knicks. That's rare for me, as you can tell. But yeah, that's it for my list. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you enjoy this kind of video or if you prefer the more basketball film related stuff, film breakdown kind of stuff. Yeah, we'll be back with another video soon. Please remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment, like I said. Also, follow us on our social media pages. Links will be in the description below. But until next time, peace.